Okay, wow. I wanted to continue dancing to that. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter where you are in the world. I am Sharyanne McSwain. I'm the president and co-leader of Echoing Green, and I'm really excited to be with you all today. We have a great group here with us today. If you haven't already, can you please take a moment to respond to the question that should have popped up on your screen about how are you connected to Echoing Green? Board member, employee, fellow, funder, friend, just let us know. It's so exciting to see so many new and familiar names that are here with us in the room. Now, as many of you know, here at Echoing Green, we invest and support social innovators throughout the entire world. We love giving folks their start on their leadership journey. And from a brand new founder to a seasoned social entrepreneur, we're really good at cultivating exceptional leaders. And after nearly 40 years and almost 1,000 fellows later, we've learned a lot about leadership and the many forms it can take. And that's why I'm so excited to listen to today's conversation, which dives into what does it mean to show up as a leader in today's very challenging and rapidly evolving landscape. For many of us in the social sector, we're experiencing so much instability. And in response, we want to show up as leaders who are ready to adapt and pivot right now. We're going to have to rethink things, reprioritize to keep our organizations and impact going. Now, I have a question for everybody on the call, not just those in formal leadership roles, because we all have a part to play and a place to lead in this important work. It really does take all of us. So I ask you, how do you want to show up as a leader right now? What are you already doing that you want to hold on to? And what are some of the ways that you're thinking about, I don't know, changing it up? I'm going to invite you to sit with those questions as you listen to today's conversation. Now, we're about to learn from two absolutely amazing Echoing Green fellows, two women. I'm every woman. I won't sing for you, sorry. But they are dynamic innovators that have been paving the way. One is advancing education in Haiti, and the other is working in maternal health in Zambia. They're going to share their stories and strategies for how they're becoming much more durable in order to weather these very strong headwinds that we're all experiencing right now. So I'm delighted to have them both with us today. But before we get to that, I am very thrilled to welcome our long-term partner and co-collaborator for this session, the John P. and Ann Welsh McNulty Foundation. Joining us today is Aprile Ajay, who is the executive director of the McNulty Foundation. Welcome, Aprile. I'm gonna toss it
Hello.
on over to you.
Thanks, Sharyanne. Good afternoon. I'm Aprile. It's such a privilege to partner with Echoing Green today and to have had the community with Echoing Green over the last 15 years. And we are in awe of the remarkable social innovators they lift up and invest in. At the McNulty Foundation, we share that mission. We work to cultivate and support leaders through programs like the McNulty Prize, which invests in breakthrough leaders at critical moments between proof of concept and scale. Among our winners is Nedgine Paul Deroly on the panel today. Like our friends at Echoing Green, we believe in proximate leadership and in the importance of supporting leaders not only in their moments of success, but when the going gets tough. Right now, as a funder, this part of the work feels urgent. What can we learn from those who haven't just survived volatility, but have navigated it with purpose? Last, last month, we co-presented on this topic at the Skoll World Forum. The session was amazing, and it made clear that we need to create the space for more dialogues among leaders who are pushing forward despite serious headwinds. We have incredible examples of that on today's panel, and I want to thank our panelists. They're so incredibly open-hearted in sharing this conversation with us. So I hand it over now to our longtime partner and friend, Cheryl Dorsey, CEO of Echoing Green.
Thank you so much to two very important partners to me. Obviously, my day-to-day partner and co-leader here at Echoing Green, Sharyanne, and a longtime ecosystem partner and friend, Aprile from the McNulty Foundation. I'm really grateful and honored to follow you both and be part of this really important conversation. And as Aprile mentioned, many of us on this screen were together last month in Oxford for the annual gathering put on by the Skoll Foundation called the Skoll World Forum. And it really has become sort of the central gathering spot from social innovators around the world. Lots of panels, gatherings. And one of the most powerful panels from my humble position was the panel that Echoing Green and McNulty Foundation sponsored, headlined by two of the speakers that we have with us today, Nedgine and Muzalema. It was remarkable. And we are going to present some of their learnings and wisdom and extraordinary advice and counsel that they shared with all of us while on stage during the Skoll World Forum. But for those who didn't join us at the Skoll World Forum this year, because so many social innovators sort of convene and sort of touch down from all over the world, it's always a good place and a good time to get a sense of what's happening in the field of social innovation. So I just wanted to share a few key takeaways before we turn it over to Nedgine and Muzalema. So I would say 2 years ago at the Skoll World Forum, um, there was a sense, I would say, of real angst, anxiety, and concern, given sort of the geopolitical changes, the seismic changes that were happening not only in our sector, but across our geopolitical landscape. This year actually felt different, and it felt like that the sector was in the midst of a period of adaptation rather than recovery, recognizing that we were not going back to the way things were, that we were going to have to build and imagine something new. So it was actually pretty exciting to see a sector, the wheels were turning, starting to rethink the fundamental architecture of the social impact space, as opposed to just patching all the holes that were left behind by all of these cuts, whether it's through development aid or local government aid. This is a new beginning. So I left feeling, I think, as well, cautiously optimistic. A couple of other quick thoughts that I left with for the week. I will say, and I'm so glad Mozalema is with us, because you could feel the energy and excitement and dynamism from so many of the world's best social innovators from the continent of Africa. The level of confidence and recognition that there was opportunity to come despite all of these development cuts and shifting priorities. It felt extraordinary to see the energy and the leaning forward of African entrepreneurs, recognizing that in many ways this was their moment. This was a global South moment. The second thing that was interesting to me was that whereas we often talk a lot about systems change, it often feels more rhetorical than real. This year, there was so much more depth and real discussion about how so many systems are not functioning well, including like the capital systems that are set up to fund social innovators like Nedgine and Musalema, but are not doing a good job of sort of smoothing out the flows of philanthropic, government, and private funding, and that needed to change. And then the last thing I'll say, there's obvious, and this should come as no surprise to anyone, ton of talk about AI, right? Both AI access, AI equity, as well as this, bullet train moving forward and how it's going to impact our sector. So those were just some of the things that we heard. But an overarching thing I will share with everyone, which is why you all came to join us today, was this question of leadership, right? Leadership in this particular moment. So, how are Nedgine, Muzalema, so many of you on this call are leaders trying to navigate through this rapidly changing landscape. What strategies are you thinking about to lead in this moment and linking your leadership to a concept of what does it mean to lead and run a durable institution that can withstand these headwinds? What should you all prioritize as leaders and what should you let go of during this moment of transition and adaptation? And how are you thinking about pivoting, iterating in this moment of change? So, with these extraordinary speakers with us today, and with this assembled group for some Q&A, we're going to have the opportunity to dig in much more deeply on all of those questions. And thank you for those who submitted some questions with your registration. We're going to look forward to digging into a few of those. But first and foremost, I'm so excited to kick off this discussion with our two extraordinary speakers. Now, I will say that I was supposed to sort of introduce a little bit about their work, but sitting in the audience at the Skull World Forum, I've got to let them share their own story of their own work and leadership because it's so extraordinary. But I will start off by welcoming our fellow Nedgine Paul Deroly, who is a 2014 fellow, and she is also a 2024 McNulty Prize winner. So Aprile, Sharyanne, and I are so glad that we get to share along Nedgine's extraordinary journey of leadership. She's the co-founder and CEO of Anseye. So Nedgine, welcome, welcome, welcome. Will you tell the group assembled here, tell us a little bit more about your organization?
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you to the Echoing Green team, to McNulty Foundation. It is such a pleasure and privilege to be here representing the Anseye movement in Haiti. So at Anseye, we are working hand in hand with our community members across rural Haiti to equip the next generation of Haitian civic leaders for educational justice. We believe in the promise and the pride that comes with being the world's first Black republic since 1804. But what we also know, similar to what Cheryl mentioned, is you fast forward to today, and so many of the systems were not set up to truly provide the equity, the justice, and the liberation that was promised when we proclaimed our independence in 1804. One of those systems is education. As a lifelong educator, it has been my pride and my privilege to join with other Haitians who decided that we could tap into the assets of our ancestral wisdom, our culture, our community norms to really re-Haitianize the education system and reclaim that power and reclaim what is ours. And so today, the Anseye movement is soon to be 15 years old. We've equipped 800 civic leaders across rural Haiti, and our fellowship programs include one for teacher leaders, one for parent leaders, one for school leaders, and most recently, one for community coaches who are working together to build that ecosystem together. Again, one that relies on our Haitian power in order to make sure that every kid gets what they deserve.
So you see why I did not introduce Nedgine. So thank you, my dear. That's why she had to introduce herself and, of course, drop the mic. And I will say, I presume all of you are seeing the screen as I am. And it makes me tear up a little bit because we've got 3 generations of Echoing Green Fellows. I am sort of called an OG. You can see from my gray hairs here, a 1992 Echoing Green Fellow. Nedgine, as a 2014 fellow, is a veteran Echoing Green Fellow. And here we have next a 2020 Echoing Green Fellow. She's a baby Echoing Green Fellow, the extraordinary Muzalema Mwanza, who is the founder, and I should also say a 2025 Schwab Foundation awardee from the World Economic Forum. And she is the founder and CEO of Safe Motherhood Alliance, an extraordinary program in Zambia, which she's going to tell us more about. Please introduce yourself and your work, Muzalema.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you for being so generous and so kind. I love it. My name is Muzalema Mwanza, and I'm the founder and CEO at Safe Motherhood Alliance. So Safe Mother Alliance is a social enterprise that works to advance safe births for pregnant women in low-income communities and rural areas. So I'm a civil engineer by training. I did it for 10 years, private sector, 15 years altogether. And one of the challenges that I found on my journey, was realizing that women had no access to equitable healthcare. And that's where everything changed for me. And I try to figure out what part can I play in this whole ecosystem. Originally, it wasn't supposed to be an organization. It was just supposed to be an idea that I pass on to someone else to take it forward. But obviously, the world had other plans. Then that's why I'm sitting here. Because right now we're working in, 10 different communities in Zambia. We are serving over 100,000 pregnant women every year, providing them with baby delivery kits, ensuring that we're able to work in the environments that created these issues. So we're talking about systems change, talking about how do we make sure that governments are held accountable for the work that they're not doing, and that's where my work finds me with other leaders from not only Echoing Green but around the globe. I'm talking about change and also what the future holds, because we always have to adapt and evolve, especially in this climate that we're dealing with funding cuts, with changing priorities. And so I'm excited to be here, excited about this conversation and what it'll lead to.
Thank you so much, Muzalema. And I'm excited to just jump in now. So, to start with, as I've mentioned, we are all trying to navigate this current landscape, and it is not easy. Can you each share how you each are thinking about this moment and trying to adapt to it? So, Muzalema, let me start with you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I think for me, trying to navigate the current landscape is really thinking about, being asked as a leader to build in permanent uncertainty, right? And not temporary uncertainty. So for many communities in Africa, volatility is not an exception. It's actually the baseline because we're so used to dealing with economic shocks, climate disruptions, strained health systems, and people have to navigate that simultaneously. At Safe Mother Alliance, we've had to stop thinking about only responding to the need, but actually thinking like an infrastructure builder and kind of anticipating what that need will be. So asking ourselves questions like how do we build systems that can still function when system cycles change, when government shifts priorities, or when communities are under pressure? And for us, that means adaptation, which obviously means becoming more community centered, and also financially resilient. So for us, it's combining what we do with frontline maternal health kit tools, manufacturing, local distribution systems, because I kind of feel volatility is no longer the disruption, it's actually the operating environment. So we're no longer just building projects, but actually building resilient systems. When we started out at Safe Mother Alliance, the idea was how do we make sure that we're able to get one kit to one pregnant woman, not realizing that there were actually 20 million pregnant women in sub-Saharan Africa that were at risk. So kind of thinking about how do we scale up? How do we work in these kind of different environments with all these shifting forces that are working against us? And for us, that means really building the infrastructure around us that ensures that we survive and building close to the problem. So kind of a bottom-up approach and not just presenting a solution to the community, because we need community buy-in. I remember early in our days, distributing kits and handing them over to pregnant women. One of the challenges that we had was women would always think that the kits were almost like a gift, right? And showing up in those spaces and realizing they're not using them. So kind of having to adapt to that and changing the language around that and realizing that if we don't build, co-create the solution with them, then they won't understand what it's for. So communities don't experience challenges one at a time, so our solutions also can't operate in silos. And for me, that means, durability is almost like a leadership discipline, ensuring that we're able to meet the next generation where they are.
So well said. Can I ask you a quick follow-up question, Muzalema? So many pearls of wisdom there. You talked also about financial resiliency. Can you give us an example of what you mean by that?
Definitely. An example I can give you is, when we were also part of the cuts for USAID that happened last year. I mean, the first email that we got was, oh, this might take a couple of months to happen, right? And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, it might take a month. And then it was, you need to stop now. So nothing was prepared for us for that, but we kind of had whispers around that this was something that was coming and was going to happen. And so for us, that meant also kind of evolving our business model. tapping into different partners, tapping into different ecosystems. For example, we tapped into, Echoing Green with the Signal Fund, and we're able to leverage that to ensure that we keep working in the communities that we work in. So I think being able to adapt as a leader to the change that happens, being able to shift that also helps you to build financial resilience and anticipating the shocks that are going to happen in your community. Those are some of the things that we did.
Just thank you for that. That was incredibly helpful. And Nadine, same question for you. How are you as a leader, a veteran leader, showing up differently and navigating this moment?
Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, I think for us, one of the things that's been incredibly difficult these last few years in Haiti has been this term that many of us, I think, are getting comfortable with, even though we don't hope that this is the norm, which is polycrisis, right? Similar to what Muzalema mentioned, there's multiple levels of crisis. In Haiti, in the last 5 years alone, we've had multiple natural disasters, specifically several massive hurricanes that led to humanitarian crisis. We've had double-digit inflation. We've also unfortunately had the presidential assassination. So our president was assassinated in 2021, which then led the way for a political vacuum that stands to this day, which then led and kind of bred the spreading, the proliferation of really violent gangs, which took over almost now 90% of our capital city and displaced millions of people. Add that in and layer in the ways in which Haitians were in some ways used as political pawn in the most recent US political elections. And so all of that, right, the debates around geopolitics and immigration in many ways felt different. These last few years for us have been noticeably different. First, because it feels like there is much more callous dehumanization of peoples, of whole peoples, conversations of indifference and dehumanization that absolutely have ripple effects across people's not just sense of self and their humanity, but their access to what is a human right. The other piece that also feels quite different is that this is not an acute crisis anymore. This is starting to feel chronic. It starts to feel like our everyday. And so when you start to hear donors say, it feels like we're heading towards a Haiti fatigue, it starts to feel like everything you hear about Haiti just feels intractable and every headline feels like nothing is going well. Those are some of the headwinds, right? That a few of you have already mentioned that we're dealing with. And so at Anseye Ayiti, I think two things that have really stood the test of time for us. First is tapping into our assets, the cultural assets and the ancestral wisdom that actually is the solid rock, the foundation on which Anseye Ayiti has always stood. Because one of the things we always knew, right, even if you're just looking at education or you're looking at social systems, we knew that there's a dynamic approach to how kids learn and how AI, as you just mentioned, Cheryl, may shift the ways in which people think about education. But what is consistent, what is permanent, are the ways in which cultural identity, civic engagement, identity, a deep understanding of one's history will always lead the way forward. And so what we've done these last few years is tapped even more deeply into engaging with that truth, right? So whether it's reaching out to anthropologists in addition to educators, reaching out to all those who can really help us tell the true story of mighty Haiti, that's been a way forward. The other thing that's been really important for us is to stand 10 toes down unapologetically for what we stand for. We know that that's a privilege. We know many of our peers, for multiple reasons, have had to, for example, scrub their websites clean of anything related to diversity, inclusion, anything related to liberation and justice. And what I'm so grateful for is a team that knew many years ago, including our board, our staff, our community members, and even many of our donors, who knew that we are about the liberation of a Black Republic, period, full stop. And so what I've appreciated is that we've leaned more into it. And lo and behold, have found others who said, I appreciate that you stood unapologetically and firm on this. How can we be of service? We haven't looked to Haiti before. We haven't given to education initiatives before, but what you do matters, and let's do it boldly together.
That's so beautifully said. I just, I've known you both for a number of years, and I'm just always so inspired and dazzled by how you show up in the world. And a lot of that, I'm totally going off script because I learn something new from these Echoing Green social innovators every time I have the privilege of being in a room, virtual or otherwise, with them. But can we back up a little bit and talk about each of your origin stories and how it supports or frames how you each are showing up in this moment. So Muzalemon, you mentioned you're a civil engineer, but tell us like how the journey began and how do you think it helps or sets you up to navigate this moment?
That's a great question, Cheryl. How long do we have? Um, so, so like I said, I'm a civil engineer, was working in the public sector for 10 years, opened my own firm for 5 years, and I was running it successfully. And then I got pregnant and found myself working in the rural areas. And I remember close colleagues and friends would tell me, oh, just go to the capital city and give birth from there. Because I realized in that moment that when I went to the hospital, I was asked to provide my own birth materials for my childbirth. And I thought this was something that was probably just unique to the area that I was living in, because it was very far from any urban town. But the more I dug in and asked the question, the more I realized that this is something that was not supposed to be made normal had been made the norm. So people had come up with all these ideas of how to, circumvert the situation by coming up with, ways of finding their own birth materials, ways of giving birth from home. So almost 50% of all births in Zambia and a lot of parts of sub-Saharan Africa happen outside of a health facility. We're talking about almost 1 million people that lack access to healthcare. And so, Echo and Green has this great question when you're being selected as a fellow, and they say, what was your moment of obligation? And for me, that kind of what it was, because I felt in that moment that something I felt I needed to do, and what can I do in my space? And like I said, for me, it all started with an idea at my kitchen table, really thinking around, if we had to come up with something, and I gave it to another person who's obviously a better entrepreneur, a better businesswoman or businessman, they would probably take it and do something with it. But everyone I gave the idea to just said, no, no, this is not our problem. This is a government problem. This is an institution problem. This is UNICEF's problem. And they do works. You talk to them. And when I went there and I talked to them, and I realized that, they were working in different spaces and different areas. And so I kind of took it upon myself, it kind of started off as something I said I'll do partially while I'm trying to figure out what to do. And before you know it, this became a full-time something that enveloped me because I couldn't look away. Currently, like I said, we've done over 100,000 kits already in distribution. And that all started with a conversation with the Ministry of Health. I was in their offices. I'm 6 months pregnant, and I think they just wanted to chase me away or scare me, because they were, they gave us their worst performing clinic for the pilot project, and they said, okay, let's see what you can do, but you're going to see how hard it is to work, how hard it is to actually solve this problem. And I think, fortunately for me, I have no medical experience at that point. So I didn't know how hard it was. I think if I did, I would have probably taken another path. So, that was fortunate because then I could see the gaps. I could see the gaps that they will not be able to see. Because for me, it was a simple issue is, there was a list that they were giving women, and this list was not allowing people to access health facilities. What if we tear up that list and replace it with a kit that had everything in that list and more, and made sure the cost was so affordable that everyone could afford it? That was the whole idea, and that's how it all started for me. And realizing that in that moment, that kind of demanded from me an emotional endurance, institutional imagination, thinking beyond what was possible, not just thinking in tens and ones, but kind of thinking in thousands and millions, because those are the women who are at risk. And some of the issues that I found were lack of access to sterile supplies, access to medical personnel, distances to nearest health facilities. So the kind of like the thing that I knew I could help in this context was giving a kit to a woman, right? And that opened so many doors because then the Ministry of Health said, okay, we can see what you're doing. Let's make it work. And now we're able to work in all the clinics in Zambia. Right now, we're talking to the Ministry of Health in Senegal and Kenya, and trying to replicate what we're doing in Zambia in those countries. So for me, when you talk about origin story, that's where it started for me. Just asking the questions of what can we do, being cautiously optimistic, as well as not, kind of being blind to the obstacles. That helped me a lot because then there was nothing to be afraid of. It's kind of like having courage after you pass the obstacle and you look back and you're like, oh my God, nobody told me that bridge was shaky. That's how I feel sometimes. And sometimes, I get people who ask me all the time, oh, times are so difficult. I wish, I was born in a different time when things were much simpler. And my answer to that is always that no, this was your time. This was your time because your community needs you. You're the change that your ancestors prayed for. So this is your time to be here right now to solve that community problem because you're closer to the problem than anyone else. And Washington will be able to tell you. You know what your community needs. You know what will serve them. And so you definitely just, have to stick it out and make sure that, for me, I like to say you tap out. You tap out all your gifts, right? Like everything that was born in you and birthed in you, you tap it out to ensure that you're able to accomplish every mission that you're supposed to set out.
That's so beautiful. I have so many nuggets, Musalema. You talk about blind to the obstacles. At Echoing Green, we look at leaders like you all and talk about blessed naivete, right? You just think you just, everyone says no. They say, oh, that's crazy. That's not possible. And you all just, again, that coding of optimism and naivete that allows you to move when others say it's not possible. I love that. And then I also think you represent, there was a wonderful book that I refer to every couple of years called Creative Genius, where part of the genius comes from applying one POV to a completely different situation. So a civil engineer looking at maternal and child health, you're not part of all the blind spots that those who are sort of in the healthcare system with all the norms and standard operating procedures, and you sort of blew that cannon wide open. It was just extraordinary. And I just love the way that you talk about it. And Nedgine, I want to ask you, the same question. Was Lema trained as a civil engineer, running her own firm? You being the slacker that you are, graduating from Yale and then getting your international education degree from Harvard, tell us a little bit more about your start and your origin story and how it helps you in this moment.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you. I am always so grateful when I have a chance to bring my parents into the space because I am, my goodness, I am a product of two parents who said, yes, all of our three children are born in Haiti. And yes, we will choose to immigrate, but they will know that home is home. They will know that when we immigrate, we are going to stand around in whatever space, whether it's the dinner table, whether it's an informal moment, and steep you in the knowledge of what it looks like to stand so proud and firm on who you are. And I'm so grateful that they had the foresight to do so, because when we first immigrated to the United States, this was a time when, oh gosh, the stereotypes and the ignorance about Haitians was running rampant, including the AIDS moment, where one of the 4 H's that were presumed to be the cause of AIDS were Haitians, right? And so all of this was confronting 3 young children who are trying to respond to ignorance with information, who are trying to take on the taunts and the teases, not shirking away and backing away from what we know to be our strong cultural pride, but rather equipping ourselves, arming ourselves with information in order to counter that ignorance with facts. And I do think that propelled me into loving education as a little person and as a young one, because my entire career in education was shaped around this core belief that education was the ticket and that education in particular would be my return ticket home. I think anyone who knows me growing up was not surprised that I decided to return home. And when I returned home, much of what I wanted to surround myself with was folks who were looking beyond the textbooks and looking beyond the headlines, folks who had taken the time to understand the true reality of Haitian history before 1804 and since. And one of the things that always stuck out to me was how I was surrounded with other little boys and girls who loved school in Haiti, right? We didn't have an issue with enrollment. We didn't have an issue even in terms of gender parity. That's not one of Haitians' challenges, right? But what kept coming back to me were the statistics. So the most disposable income of Haitians is spent on education because we still have a very privatized system, right? But then when you look at the numbers, you realize that only 30% of children were passing primary school. And only 1% of children were reaching university, not completing university. Only 1% were reaching university. And so there's this contradiction, right? There's something that I couldn't try to figure out. And so I took all of the time in those institutions you mentioned, Cheryl, and even in the spare time to do the work to figure out what has happened. Why is the system designed in a way to make sure that all kids are not receiving what is their due right? What is their fundamental right in terms of equal educational opportunity? And lo and behold, the information coming back to me, this is well before APA even was a thought, is that they have stripped the education system in Haiti of all of what makes us powerful. So you take out mother tongue instruction, right, which is not unique to Haiti, but they reject Creole and they put in French. They took out civics education. You take out culture and customs because you consider it inferior or backwards. And you literally have an image of a child when they step through the doors of a classroom who's being told to take off their identity, right? Sit here, repeat after me, memorize some facts, and maybe you'll make it through a couple of grade levels. And so fast forward to 2013 and 2012, when I decided to return home full time and just listen. I wanted to listen to our elders. I wanted to listen to those who had taken the time to understand why this education system was designed to operate in this way. And so for about 3 to 4 years, I just listened, never with a thought similar to Musalema that this could be an organization. I just wanted to lend my service and lend something of myself to joining other activists who knew that the education system was not yet ours, but could be reclaimed as ours towards real self-determination. And so out of those 3 to 4 years of listening, one key question I asked, only one, it wasn't a checklist exercise. I think that's really important to point out, right? I call them listening tours now, but it wasn't set up, right, in a formal way. And the one question I loved asking is, how are we at our best? Not what is broken, not what needs to be fixed, not what these multilaterals are telling us can happen, but how are we as a Haitian people at our best? And the fruit and the responses of those 3 to 4 years of listening to the responses to that question is the foundation on which Anseye Ayiti sits. We call it the 3 C's of culture, customs, and community. Again and again, our community members told us that if we were to reintegrate those 3 C's, the sky is the limit for every single child across Haiti. And so that's what Anseye Ayiti came to be. And that's the foundation on which we stand today, 130 partner schools later and 25,000 students later.
Oh, just so inspiring. And thank you for bringing up your parents, who I can only imagine the pride they have in you, Nedgine. And, Echoing Green has done a lot of research on sort of the capital barriers that people of color, women, intersectional leaders, women of color, global South leaders confront in the social impact space. But I always think about your parents were your friends and family round, right? That everything they poured into you, that social capital, has you sitting here today. Musalema has you sitting here today, has me sitting here today. And that's just so powerful. So thank you for raising them up and acknowledging their vital role in your success. So you both have alluded to scale. And I will say that there is a reason that Nedgine is a McNulty Prize awardee. It is such a prestigious an important award in the social impact space, but it is a privileged perch that is given to social impact leaders who have broken through, that have achieved a level of scale like Nedgine. And there is a reason that Musalema has gone on to be a Schwab awardee, standing on stage 2 years ago at the World Economic Forum because of the level of scale that she and Safe Motherhood Alliance have achieved. So I know a lot of us, we all think about scale because we're trying to have impact and we care about the communities with whom we have the privilege to work. Can you just talk about your version of scale and how you're thinking about it in this moment? Musalema, let me ask you to go first.
Thanks, Cheryl. So for us, when we think about scale, what we think about is we try to stay very close to the signal, not the noise. Because in uncertain environments, not every, idea deserves scaling. So for us, we always ask the question, does this solve a real problem? Will the community actually use it? Can it survive beyond, dependency? Or can it be self-sustainable? And the questions to also ask is, should we scale out? Should we scale in? Or should we scale deep? Because then when you can answer those questions, you're able to realize that sometimes, scaling means, scaling slowly enough to learn properly. I learned that very quickly on, in my own organization when the demand for kits outpaced what we could produce and manufacture. And so kind of like having to roll back and say, okay, you know, this is a catch-22, right? Because we're supplying, over 1,000 kits per day, but now we're requested to supply 3,000 kits. That's very nice. That's a nice problem to have. But let's first solve that problem of how to, make sure we're able to meet that demand before we go to our next community. And for an entrepreneur, that's always a very tough decision because you kind of want to move very fast. So having that kind of context also helped us to kind of figure out that not every idea needs that kind of energy forever. So I think, just because something is innovative, it doesn't mean it's durable. So kind of having to separate those kind of ideas and realizing that, you need to learn quickly, but also you need to be very honest with yourself and your team because scaling too early can also break community trust because then they just become numbers on a sheet of paper, right? We did 10,000 last week, we're doing 20,000 this week. And, for most leaders, they get caught up in that. So for us, we try to figure out what, restraint, what does that look like when you're a leader? And ensuring that you're able to serve the communities because they trust you, and that work that you're doing is something that's very precious for that community. And so for us, it's also about ownership and challenging the assumption, that social enterprises always have to choose between impact and, financial sustainability, because the future will require hybrid models that can generate revenue while protecting mission integrity. And that's what we're trying to build, ensuring that we're able to understand what it means when we go into a community. And obviously, we have to learn about the culture there and we have to respect it because you can't pull everything away. Like Nedgine was saying, you have to ensure that you're able to leave the core that's there so that they also, when they look back, they're able to recognize themselves and they haven't become some version of an impact report. So for us, that's something that's, very, very deep for us that we want to do a Safe Mother Alliance. And in every community that we go into, we try to recognize that and try to ensure that the communities, they're not just numbers on an Excel sheet, but these are lives that we're saving. This is a mother and a child that have put their trust in us. So, for us, our motto is scale slowly and steadily.
So beautiful. And thank you, both of you who keep coming back to this notion of trust, respect. Nedgine, how about you? How are you thinking about scale in this moment?
Oh, I could not agree more, Muslim. I love that you brought up the importance of trust. I think one of the things that I have been so grateful for across our team is that we realize that trust takes time to build and can be lost in an instant, right? And so that is a currency that we do not negotiate in terms of how we approach this work. I'll be honest, the word scale, I have had a hard time with that word. I think similar to the path that Muslena has mentioned, I feel like there's a lot that's in our world of social innovation and social entrepreneurship that for me is jargon that feels almost automatically accepted. And one of the things that always made me pause is the jargon that just didn't sit authentically, naturally right with the ways in which we wanted to build this movement really hand in hand with our community members. And so from day one, scale was one of those words that I couldn't quite grapple with because in our context in Haiti, and I'm sure in many other contexts, many people have felt like guinea pigs. They have felt the deep cynicism and distrust that comes with folks coming with a survey, people coming with a questionnaire, kind of the checklist approach where you're coming to extract information from us. You're coming to make certain commitments and promises, but there is no follow through. There's no depth of relationship. And so early on, I think that was one of the words where we said, let's scale deep always. Let's make sure that the planting of the seeds of Anseye Ayiti's revolution can outlive Anseye Ayiti. We actually do not believe that Anseye Ayiti, as it currently stands as a nonprofit, should exist in perpetuity. We believe that if we have planted the seeds of this revolution, it will be carried on and bear fruit well beyond an NGO, right? And so we believe that deeply. How scaling deep has looked to us, first, listening. I feel like a broken record, but I will say it always. We have listened deeply to our elders and to our community members to make sure that we go as fast as we can and as slow as we must, right? At the end of the day, it was our community members saying, and what about our parent leaders? Right? You're inviting them to all of the events, but can they be at the table? Can they be part of the decision-making process? And they helped us create the Parent Leader Fellowship. They were the ones who said, if you believe in proximate leadership, then we must include parent leaders who haven't had a chance to finish school, parents who are not fully literate, but who have so much to offer the advancement of Anseye Ayiti's movement. And I'll tell you right now, that's the biggest regret, is that we didn't have parent leaders since day one as part of our fellowship programming. And so at the end of the day, listening is so important to us. Number two, scaling deep in proof point communities, right? So we have started in 5 rural communities, and 12 years later, that's exactly where we are, right? There are folks who were part of the listening tours in 2009 and 2010 who are the school directors of our 130 partner schools today, 12 and 13 years later, because we took the time to build a relationship. We took the time to build our credibility and trust. And at the end of the day, too, we were open enough to receiving the critical feedback and the constructive feedback that comes with folks who realize that we're in this together. I'm also so grateful that 80% of our staff were born and raised in the communities where we work, right? This is more than a mission and an org statement to them. They were sitting in the classrooms of now the students who we are looking to build something different for. And then the other piece too that comes with scaling deep is recognizing that if we are not well, we are building on shaky sand, right? And so we build so much of our work around educational justice, but given this time of volatility and uncertainty, we realized that healing and wellness and well-being had to be core to our work. And that's for the reason that we started to partner with Haitian psychologists and social workers. Because if we're trying to remove the trauma of a colonial system of education, if we're trying to remove ourselves from what has been imposed on us, it's not enough to name the trauma. Where does the healing come in? And that healing takes time. And so I'm so grateful that we took the time to listen and build in a way that we were well enough in order to make the right decisions, whether it's strategic, whether it's ambitious or audacious. But right now it's sitting on a platform of wellness and well-being for all of us.
Oh, so beautifully said, both of you. I want to leave a couple of minutes for questions to you both. And one of our guests asks you both, for leaders building from the global south without stable institutions or inherited capital, how do you design durability when the ground was never stable to begin with?
I appreciate that question so much. The ground was never stable to begin with in our context, and I'm sure it applies to others, because it was designed in order to replicate harm and to replicate oppression and injustice. And so that had to be first for us, is to really name the fact that the system was never designed to be of service in terms of equity and justice and liberation for Haitian people in our context. And so once you name it, similar to what I just mentioned about working with psychologists and social workers, then we can start to take the steps towards healing and addressing how to dismantle it. Because one of the biggest fears we had at Anseye Ayiti was adding in kind of the superficial fixes on a foundation which was just inherently inequitable, right? Yes. And so we had to do that hard work first. The other piece of this is there are hidden assets, I believe, in every marginalized and underserved community. They have been too long overlooked and ignored and silenced. And so one of the things that I believe we continue to do well is taking the time to unbury and peel back all of the ways in which myths and taboos have isolated our people from the truth of our power. How do we reclaim that power if we don't know where it is? How do we look beyond the printed and the distributed textbooks to make sure that we tap into the proverbs, the folk stories, the music, and all of the richness, right? And the power of our culture, which lo and behold is not nice to have, it's need to have to kids accelerating their learning. We have kids now succeeding at 90 and 95% on time and on grade level because they're not just memorizing math and learning how to read and write. They're understanding who they are and making sure that self-determination is what they ask for. Yes. The other quick thing I'll mention is when the ground is shaky, look for partners and allies and accomplices. None of us can do this work independently. And I'm grateful that I had a chance to shout out already the anthropologists, the social workers, the psychologists, the activists who have been standing shoulder to shoulder with us as teachers and educators to make this system become what it will become.
Beautifully said. Would you like to add something, Muzalema?
Yes, I would. It's a great question. And thank you, Nadine, for answering it. So I think, leaders, especially from the global south and women leaders, they're often expected to carry extraordinary levels of emotional labor while still delivering exceptional outcomes. So there's often this pressure to appear endlessly resilient, nurturing, visionary, operationally strong all at once, right? But I also think, women leaders bring the most important strengths into systems leadership, into financial resilience, and that's, through long-term thinking, community building, as Nedgine said, and the ability to hold complexity. So, resilience for me and financial sustainability shouldn't always be a justification for under supporting women leaders. Because many women leaders are building institutions while simultaneously holding families, communities together. So we need systems that support women beyond moments of crisis. So the key, I think, for that is to always have kind of, conspirators that are close by you, that understand your work and love your solution, and ensure that in your moments of crisis, the way Echoing Green does, they're able to support you beyond, that crisis moment, because that's what we need when you're solving complexity. So for us at Safe Mother Alliance, we understand that to build an ecosystem, you need partners. And for us, that's what we built from day one. From day one, I knew I needed the Ministry of Health support, the government support, despite them being the ones who built the very systems we're trying to dismantle. I needed their buy-in because it wouldn't work without them being sitting at the table. And because of that, we're able to scale up more quickly in their, hospitals and clinics, because women trust the hospitals, right? So we're not talking from without and saying, oh, we're just this organization and we want to do X, Y, Z. When we're starting with a partner like Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, they also understand to say, okay, so the education piece is ensuring that women understand their reproductive health, they understand about their reproductive rights and what they need. The Ministry of Health piece is them knowing that women are now going to start demanding for equitable healthcare. And that creates policy change. A recent example of that, I can tell you, we've been working in this space for a couple of years now. And recently the government approached us to say, look, they're starting up this new insurance policy system. And they now want to integrate our kits into that and be able to distribute them at a whole new level. Right. And that was the dream. The dream was never to only distribute, a couple of kits to a few communities. The dream has always been to ensure that women do not feel out of place and are not stigmatized for not having these tools. And that dream is happening. So for future thinking, we're now thinking, where does that place us as Safe Mother Alliance? What do we do? We know the government won't build the systems to ensure that those kits are able to be distributed, the digital tools, they'll need that from someone. And that someone is going to be us because we know the system. We know how to build it.
It's beautiful. And I would be remiss. I mean, we could stay on with you two all day. I certainly would. Just the wisdom is extraordinary. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask you two extraordinary leaders, what would it look like for systems and funders to better support women and women identified folks in building and sustaining leadership over time? Advise them on how to show up for women leaders like you all.
Thank you for that question, Cheryl. When I think about that question, I think about all the different boxes that people try to put you in, right? Whether it's woman, whether it's Black woman, whether it's Haitian, and the idea that they have a single story of what that should look like. Yeah. And so I think that the biggest thing that comes to mind for me in terms of kind of sharing this feedback with them is the idea that we do not look one way. There is not one box or one example of what a woman leader is or what a woman leader can do. I think it's so important for us to start to have, back to the diversity, inclusion, and equity, right? This conversation about the myriad ways, the multiple ways that women can and should and are already leading. One of the things that we know is the patriarchy is alive and well. It's being dismantled, but I think we need more allies and accomplices speaking up boldly, openly, and publicly about the ways in which we continue to face those hurdles at a different level as women leaders.
Moselema?
Yeah. Just to add to that, I think funders, need to support leaders, not just projects. So philanthropy has to look very different. Philanthropy for Africa shouldn't look like it's a handout. There should be ownership with it, because too much funding is optimized for outputs, while very little is invested in leadership sustainability, institutional capacity, rest, succession planning, resilience. So what it means is leaders who are solving the hardest problems are often operating under the most fragile conditions. So what we need is flexible capital, because that will be the difference between survival and collapse for a solution which is greatly needed in the community. So funders will say they want innovation, but then they punish experiments, they punish the innovation, right? Because they'll say we need a 12-sheet deck and we need XYZ, and they'll put you in 12 months of due diligence when you actually need the funding right now to help your community. So long-term trust-based funding changes what organizations are capable of building. And for us, that means helping to build the infrastructure that dismantles some of these systems.
Beautifully said. And I apologize. So many people put in so many questions for you two, and I so apologize that we were not able to get to all of them. We invite you to please come back to Future Leader Lens, other opportunities to be in community with Echoing Green and other social innovators. Sign up for our newsletter so we can direct you to other resources. But very grateful to have had this time with these extraordinary leaders, Nedgine and Mozalema. And I'm going to turn it over to another extraordinary leader, my colleague, Sharyanne.
Thanks, Cheryl. I really, I am moved. I am thoroughly moved by what we saw here today. I have a new catchphrase, which is home is home. So thank you so much for that, Nedgine. At Echoing Green, we have the privilege of supporting leaders like Muzalema and Nedgine. We do that not only through capital, not only through money, but through community and capacity building and true long-term partnership with these wonderful leaders. They're so brilliant and so wonderful. And if you, like me, were moved today, I am going to ask you to invest with us in that work. Echoing Green has dropped in the chat our link so that you can give to Echoing Green. Please consider that. Please consider that. And I want to thank you all for being with us today. Thank you all for your questions, your comments in the chat. Really appreciate everything each of you has contributed today. Thank you very much, and we will see you on our next Leader Lens.